Hi, welcome to Africa in Perspective. My name is Nelda. I talk about African affairs Mondays through Fridays. In today's video, we're going to be addressing the concept of the lazy African. This is because in a lot of my videos, I've noticed one or two people will pop up here and there, especially when I'm addressing things like African myths or stereotypes that people have about Africa, how Africa was in the past before colonialism, what Africa is doing right now, why Africa is underdeveloped. Regardless of the concepts that I'm addressing in any given video, I've noticed that people typically find a way to bring up this idea of, Africans are just lazy. And so we're going to be addressing that today, starting with where exactly did this idea come from? Now, of course, guys, when we talk about Africa's history or anything that affects Africans, there is no way around the idea of colonialism or imperialism because it's a real thing that affected our people. Now, way before colonialism, though, there was a guy called Lenos. Now, he decided to write a book called Systema Naturae, and this was in 1735. He's one of the people that pushed this idea of Africans being idle, just carefree people who do not care about developing themselves. In this book that he wrote, he described 4 different categories of the human varieties, as he called them at that time. He described Africans as black, phlegmatic, and in terms of personality, described us as crafty, lazy, and careless, and people who are governed by random decisions. That was his description. Now you may be like, oh, okay, maybe here's a point. Look at the way he described other races. By the way, he divided the whole human population to 4 races. Crazy. And while we're on this topic, I'll just say, I've always said this, the function of race is just racism. There is literally no qualification. There is no reason to be dividing ourselves according to races. But anyways, Mr. Lenos had some points to make. He described Native Americans as copper-colored, and then they're obstinate, which means they're stubborn, and they're free. They're ruled by customs. He described Asians as sallow-skinned, haughty, and greedy, and they're ruled by opinions. And then he described Europeans as light-skinned, gentle. There is nothing gentle about what the Europeans were doing at that time, but acute, like they're sharp-minded and they're inventive and they're ruled by laws. This is how Carl Linnaeus described people, and his work had actual effect in the way people were viewing different races at that time. Now, he's not the only person who was pushing for this idea. There was also somebody called Josiah C Not, and he and his bestie, George Guyton, wrote a book called Types of Mankind. It seemed like these people just had this obsession with describing different parts of humanity, And so they came up with this book and it pushed for polygenism. Now that sounds really fancy schmancy, but poly means many, genism is attached to the word gene. He came up with this idea, him and his friend Guyton, came up with this idea that human beings came from multiple origins, which has of course been debunked by historians like Charles Darwin, science itself, just biology. We all have a common ancestor, which means whether you believe in the creation theory, like God created us, we all came from Adam and Eve, or the evolution theory, it's clear that we came from one single source. Now, he also pushed this idea of racial hierarchies, that because we come from different origins, some origins are just better than others. And it was also around this time when people started they were trying to prove scientifically that some races are just inferior. And they also looked at things like skulls, for example, like the shape of a Greek man's skull is shaped more human. I don't even know what that means. The shape of like a typical black African man's skull was shaped close to a chimpanzee. So therefore, Africans were chimpanzees to them, which was exactly how they ended up justifying things that they did during the imperialism era. So I hope that gives you just like a brief overview, because I think one of the reasons this idea of like the lazy African, the idle African, Africans don't like doing things for themselves, all this was crafted up to dehumanize us so that they could rationalize what they ended up doing to us in the first place. Now, we were described as idle, like I said, unproductive, and we needed to be civilized. And that is where we're not going to talk about it deeply in this video, but this concept of the white savior, like the white savior mentality, like, oh my God, we need to save the Africans. We need to civilize them. We need to give them something to work for, because they're just sitting around basking in the sun instead of going to industries and factories and sending their kids to industries. We're not going to talk about that today, are we? Now, after that, of course, Europe colonized Africa, colonized everybody and their moms in the world. And there was also this idea it was just underneath, but it was kept up. And even when 12 million people were taken off the continent of Africa, and they were sent to the Americas, while in the Americas, this idea still persisted. So, for example, they used to do these things called minstros, like minstrel shows. And I want you guys to look at this picture on the screen, The guy you see on the right side is the same guy on the left side. This is a white man who put in blackface. This is what you guys need to understand. Like when you see African Americans really angry when people are doing blackface or using the N-word, it is because they were literally treated like like I said, they were justifying that we were close to chimpanzees so they could treat us as subhuman. They were mocking us. They were mocking our skin color. They were mocking our shapes of our lips, which very funny because now everybody wants to get bigger lips, but we're not going to talk about that today, are we? Now, the issue is with these minstrel shows, it's not just that they were putting up caricatures of what it meant to be black, but it's the fact that when they were portraying black people, they would portray them as like stupid, goofy people, like, oh my god, look at me, I have no idea what I'm doing. That's basically what they would do. And it was something that was so popular. Like, look at all these, the Gortons minstrels. Look at the pose that this guy is striking with his leg on top of the other one. There is the ALG field minstrels, the 4 guys there standing, putting blackface, massive pink lips, mocking us. And every single time these characters were portrayed as stupid, idle, they don't want to do anything, they're clumsy, they have no idea what they have no acute minds and inventiveness. Do you guys see what I'm getting at? This was clearly something that was repeated, honed in over and over and over and over again, that it has lasted not only among non-Africans, but over time, people of African origin, whether it's people who were left behind on the continent or those who were taken away, we started believing this internally. And now, even Africans ourselves, we're saying in my comment sections on YouTube, oh, Africans are just lazy. Do you guys see where this is getting at? And I've said this over and over again, yeah. It is very important to realize that everything in this world is purely a matter of marketing. Think about things like Labubus, for example. Very ugly. This is my controversial opinion. You can cancel me if you want. Labubus are ugly. But they made the guy who made them a billionaire because it was marketed properly. We have been marketed as lazy, as idle, as stupid. And that is a stereotype that people have around us in the world. And I think it's very important to have a conversation about this because it's damaging our global reputation. And the implications of this, I'm just reading here on my notes because I have clear examples of how we've been portrayed in the media. Like, I'll give you an example again. I grew up watching Nickelodeon. My parents could not afford Disney. In Nickelodeon, when they had like these TV shows for kids, by the way, they would always they would sneak in like a black character. That black character was always the goofy one. They would come in and they would say the funny line like, ha 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 ha. And then people would laugh and then they would go. They never had any character development, any clear nothing. Like, you can, if you've watched Nickelodeon, you will testify that what I'm saying is true. And this is portraying us in a way that is affecting our ability to get certain jobs. Like, sometimes when you hear like, oh my gosh, he's a black doctor. Why is it impressive that there's a black doctor? We can be doctors as well because we've been portrayed as people who cannot handle the tough stuff. So, and this is something that is affecting how African leaders are perceived. Like, literally the other day, I made a video about Trump inviting 5 African leaders, and he was talking about, oh, you really speak very impressive English to the Liberian president. Of course he speaks impressive English. How is that? Like, very confusing behavior. But also, what I found very interesting is there was an article I was reading on The Guardian. It's from a couple months ago, actually. And it says the negative stereotypes that people have about Africans and black people affect us on the international level in terms of our lending, how we're able to get funds. Typically, when, for example, a bank, like say the IMF or the World Bank, they're trying to give you money, they will do a risk assessment. And this stereotype that we're lazy, we can't work for ourselves, we never pay things back, that stereotype is affecting the sort of loans our governments are able to get and how they're treated with in terms of interest, in terms of restructuring. Any of that is going to affect us as well. 3.2 billion. That is the figure that was given for a year. Some countries in Africa don't even have that GDP. We're losing 3.2 billion just from being perceived as people who cannot pay stuff back and cannot handle big investments into their future. So this is critical. It's critical to address this. We're not lazy. Like, where did people get this concept? Because look at, like, I have pictures here as well, and I will insert them. If you look at African markets, like typical markets in any given African country, like the mamas, I would call them mamantilias, for example, in Tanzania, like the women who get up early in the morning and they cook, like in the markets, or they sell vegetables. Those women usually work like 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. a 12-hour shift. And you think doing a 9 to 5 at McKinsey is harder work than these people out in the sun. They're selling. They're the best salespersons I've ever met in my entire life. They will sell you. They could sell you sand in the desert. They're that good. And this is so common in multiple areas in Africa. Look at the people who drive matatus, like in Kenya. Kenyans call them matatus, or like boda bodas in Tanzania, or like just cars, Uber drivers, people who work in very menial, quote unquote, menial jobs. These people work really, really hard. One of the main things that Africa does is agriculture. And in Africa especially, we are, of course, adopting things like tractors and all of that, but a lot of it is still manual work. You're telling me that a continent where a majority of our resources come from agriculture and mining, which I'll be addressing in another video as well, but you're telling us that that is lazy, that going down in a mine to get the diamonds that you people are wearing on your fingers, that is lazy. you must be absolutely crazy. And I just want to close this by saying this. The reason I'm doing this video especially is because we have started to internalize this, like I said, and it's affecting us on a psychological level. We are showing up in the world thinking that we're inferior than other people while we're not. And if you are somebody who is like, Africans are actually kind of lazy, give me your points. Show me your data. What is showing that we are lazy? Where are you getting that point that we are lazy? Because I think I made a video recently talking about how this idea of like some cultures are better than others, because our way of life is different from the rest of the world. Some of us don't believe in doing Excel spreadsheets for the rest of our lives. It's okay once in a while if you want to dance in the streets. Maybe that was the lifestyle we used to have. We just dance, we eat our food, and we go to sleep. We tell each other stories under the trees, and we live happily ever after. But somebody else came with their own culture and was like, no. These people are idle. They need work. And then they put us to work. Speaking of which, by the way, if Africans are so lazy, or if black people are so lazy, why did you want to enslave them? Why would you want to enslave somebody who's lazy? You want somebody who's lazy working for you? Exactly. So let's get this out of our minds. This idea that we are lazy. No, we're not. And if you think you're lazy, start working hard, really hard. Debunk that. Show people that that is not something that we associate ourselves with. And we are people who care about our work ethic, but we have our own way of life. And it also needs to get the same respect as other people's work ethics as well. So that is all I want to talk about today. And I hope this was a useful video, a useful rant, a little bit of a history lesson, but hopefully that is good for you today. So thank you so much for watching, and you'll see me in the next video. Bye.